Passage 4. Now, passage 4 dives into an area that quite a few of us did not like back in school, history, but then this is an area that the teachers, that the paper designer at the IIMs often dip into when it comes to creating passages, and therefore one of those areas that we better become comfortable with. So it talks about this really fascinating aspect, and that is historians need to examine their position on quantification and the role of digital resources in understanding the past. When I read it, I was a little taken aback. I was like, what are they trying to say? But then I continued. So then he said the reformation of economic history has meant that economic historians have largely left history for economics. Okay. Quantitative history has been neglected by history departments as students choose to study newly voguish modules on human animal histories instead. Okay, but I'm still not able to understand the first sentence. Negotiating the relationship between big and small history is not impossible. I don't even know what big and small mean in this context, but it is much harder in the absence of shared methodological assumptions and linguistic understandings. So I understand this sentence in isolation, though I don't know what big and small history here means. For example, is state assumed to refer to the process and personnel of government, or to the land with a national boundary? Okay, that's an elaboration of the last sentence. How does optical character recognition change the form of the original text when creating extensible markup language files, which are certainly not facsimiles of the original material? Now suddenly that light goes on that, oh, when we digitize the texts and we make them accessible, where we can create markup language files, we are somehow altering the character of that language. We are altering the way in which that language was processed by the natives who used that language. You know, they did not have this technology available. They could not look at it from that perspective. So the moment I read this, I could then I continued the process of digitization is a creative and transformational process. Fabulous. So this is where I could understand the first sentence. They need to examine their position on quantification and the role of digital resources in understanding the past, because they can bring in some differences, some distortions. Okay. Then it introduces us to a group of evolutionary scientists who are known as field scientists, who go strictly by data, and they have a well-developed critical sense of the need to interpret and contextualize data. So what a lovely word to capture their thought. Questioning how their observational records refract the events that took place. Remember in the physics classes you've studied refraction, light beam goes into the prism, 7 colors, right? So somehow, and this once again helps me understand that first sentence of the passage, that somehow when you are able to digitize it, you are able to see the kind of things that the natives probably were not even able to see. So that may distort what you've understood from that language using the tools that are there at your disposal today. So those things. And then there is this paragraph that talks about it is not at all clear that creating a science of history, okay, this is fine. How to do science outside the laboratory should be invaluable, okay, then we need to be mathematical, data driven. So that's once again fabulous. Okay, so terrific. So that's basically the passage. It explores a particular aspect of studying the history, the way it should be done, the way some people have been doing it. The others also need to learn from it, how technology affects our interpretations, and therefore we need to be mindful of these. These are the kind of thoughts that I'm left with after reading this particular passage. So let's dive into question number 13. Which one of the following statements best describes what the passage is about? A. The passage discusses role of quantification and the need to balance quantification and narratives in understanding the past. Narratives are addressed towards the end. Notice this, the last paragraph does talk about the narrative. So yes, it does say that we need to go in for quantification, but then it may change certain things, so we be mindful of that. And at the same time, I'll just take you to the last paragraph once again. Here it is. So mathematical quantitative models aim to develop need to be balanced by explicitly fictional, qualitative, imaginary efforts. So yes. So A is quite close to it. Let's look at B. The passage describes the failure of explicitly fictional, qualitative, imaginary efforts. No, this is contradictory. The passage in fact wants us to do that along with the quantified version. So B is definitely ruled out. C, the passage discusses the shift from traditional narrative methodology of history to the modern science of history. No, the passage says that we need to build in the scientific angle, or bring in that scientific angle to the study of history. At the same time, we need to balance it with the narrative methodology. So it is not talking about the shift, it is actually talking about an integration. So C is also ruled out because it contradicts the passage. D, the author discusses how field scientists developed a deeply reflexive approach to the recording and interpretation of data. This is narrow. This talks about one paragraph. I think it was what, second or third paragraph. Let's just go back and check which one it was. Sorry. The second paragraph. So this one basically goes ahead and talks about just the second paragraph, and therefore it is narrow, and that's why A wins in this particular case and should be chosen as our answer. So A it is. Here is question number 14. Okay, so this brings in that sentence where remember I highlighted this word, no, refract. So which of the following best explains the claims made in this statement? So what is the claim? That okay, we are doing it, but we need to be mindful that we may see things that the natives, that the original users did not see. We may distort things, right? And when you look at option C, field scientists are aware of the limitations of their observational records. So they look at it, this may not be right. Comes very close to it. Now when you say field scientists are unsure of the amount of data available, no, it is not about the amount, it is about they are not very sure of whether their interpretation is 100% right or not. Similarly, if you look at B, field scientists reflect deeply before recording or interpreting. No, when we say they're reflexive, when we say their approach is reflexive, it's basically always questioning how their observational records refract. It is not about reflecting deeply before you start. It is about reflecting on the fact that what you've interpreted or what the observational records that you have created may not be accurate. D, field scientists are confident, not at all linked with what the sentence conveys, and that is why our best answer here is option C. So question number 14, C it is. With that, let's dive into 15th. All of the following statements, if false, could be seen as being in accordance with the passage except. So let's ignore this briefly. So if false could be seen in accordance with the passage. So all of these, if false, should agree with the passage. So let's falsify them. Historians are not justified in their position. History departments in universities across the globe do not necessarily advocate. C, the methods used by field scientists are useful. The question of human identity always remains unanswered. So let's just change this always to never. Or in fact, even better, I can say has been answered. Right? That's the falsification of D. So now let us check if they are consistent with the passage or not. So A, historians are not justified in their position on the role of quantification in studying their subject. This is something which is in accordance with the passage, because the passage says that historians need to rethink their position on quantification and they need to examine it. Remember, he advocates that they need to bring in that quantification. So yes, A is in agreement. B, history departments do not advocate the quantification. This is also, the author is saying, the author has in fact said in the passage that quantification has been neglected by history departments. So yes, B is consistent with the passage. They do not necessarily advocate, they've in fact neglected it. C, the methods used by field scientists are useful in understanding history. Absolutely, the author has in fact told us that we need to learn something from field scientists and bring their approach to the study of history. So A, B and C are all in accordance. Okay, D, the question of human identity has been answered. Now. You remember the last sentence of the passage? Let me take you back to it. Take 10 seconds. Look at this. That said, the question of who we are does always remain open. Whereas, what does D say? That the question of human identity has been answered. The passage says, oh, it remains open. So D contradicts the passage, which means that it is not in accordance and therefore should be the answer. So what did I do? I falsified all the four and checked whether they are consistent with the passage or not. A, B and C corroborated or were in agreement with the passage. D contradicted, and that is why D should go on and become our answer to this particular question. And here is your next one. Which one of the following observations is a valid conclusion to draw from the statement? So what is the statement? Taken from the first paragraph. Negotiating the relationship between big and small history is not impossible, but it is much harder in the absence of shared methodological assumptions and linguistic understandings. So let's check. A, the connection between big and small history is tenuous in the absence of quantitative history. We cannot come up with quantitative from this sentence. We cannot figure out tenuous, and therefore A cannot be inferred. B, common methodological assumptions and linguistic terms makes it easier to ascertain the relationship between big and small history. So it's not impossible, but it is much harder in their absence, which means that their presence will make it easier. So B is definitely true on the basis of the sentence. C, historians must negotiate the relationship. I don't know. Can't say. D, historians choose the easier modulus. Human animal histories are mentioned in the rest of the paragraph somewhere. It is not something that is going to belong to this particular statement that is given to us in the question. So this is also can't say, and that is why our answer to question number 16 should be option B. So that's your passage number